It's already a 14th day since three blind people, are on a hunger strike in the building of the Blind Union of Georgia. Circumstances separately because all of them have different circumstances, and they demand their restoration in their jobs, in their positions. I want to speak about what generally goes on in the Blind Union because it has a lot to do with what happened now. So the GBU, the Georgia's Blind Union, was created in 1926, still during the Soviet Union, actually on its dawn. And then it owned and ruled a lot of different buildings. It had a lot of sheltered workshops for the blind and visually impaired persons. It was providing housing, employment opportunities, and because everything back then was public, it was through the Blind Union that the state was providing blind people with certain social guarantees that it did. But mostly people were settling in a specialized settlements. However, and they were growing up there and getting married and having children and raising them there, and working in specialized workshops, and they would graduate from specialized school. There was huge level of segregation, and the explanation for this and the argument was of course nice. It was not like they were forced to live there. It was that it's there that you will have an accessible environment. You will live with your schoolmates, with your colleagues who will understand your needs, and because again the government did not provide any jobs essentially outside of this sheltered system, people of course were opting in to stay and live and work there through there. In 1990s, obviously after Georgia's restoration of independence, the government did give these buildings and a lot of properties to the Blind Union as a property. So they privatized it in the name of the Blind Union. Why? Because it had many members. Today it has more than 3,000 members, all over the country, all over Georgia, and the idea was that they should be defending and representing the interests of the blind, and this is why they were given these properties. However, just like any other investment contract in Georgia, that usually has very weak conditionalities. In normal countries in the West, when you do, for example, when the state gives a concession to a big company or consortium to exploit certain land for free or certain natural resources or certain properties, they usually make it a condition, for example, that they ensure environmental protection, that they take up some social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, that they, I don't know, employ their citizens, employ underprivileged people, and make other types of conditionalities. Here in Georgia, this mechanism is very weak when we talk about business contracts, but even more so also when we talk about the Blind Union. And also the enforcement of these contracts usually is pretty weak. But in any case, the government did not ensure and did not nudge the Blind Union to have more democratic structure. So today its statute constitutes a lot of undemocratic and also unforeseen norms and regulations. For example, we do not directly elect our chairperson. So 3,000 members, yes, there are these people, but we really don't have any influence over our organization. Well, that is supposed to be ours. We cannot elect our chairperson. When a person's membership is, somebody is dismissed from the union, that person does not have any kind of say. Essentially, there are 48 delegates that are elected, and who elect the chairperson. So it's like electoral college in the US, yeah, like how they elect the president. These people are allowed to expel from the union. For example, legally, they can expel 2,000-3,000 people without any justification because the statute allows them to do this. Now, with the determination of the amount and of the quotas of the delegates, it's also unforeseen. Uh, we have different representations in the regions of Georgia. We have 15 of them generally, 4 in Tbilisi, and then we have 11 others outside. And each of these representations has a quota of how many delegates should be elected from that place. And this depends on the amount of members. And but the thing is, the rule based on which the quotas are established is not written in the statute. So every 5 years before the delegate elections happen, the board, who consists of the delegates, not all 48 delegates are in the board. There are currently, I think, 7. Yeah, there are seven delegates right now in the board. So the board determines how many delegates should each of these districts have. So for instance, in theory again, if illegally, if they see that certain region is in the opposition to the governing elite, they can say, well, you will have just 1 delegate. You don't need more. And it would be fully legal. Also, it's unclear who is allowed to propose the amendments to the statute. Also, these delegates, when they vote for a given chairperson, they are not accountable before the rest of the members. So, for example, I want somebody else to be elected, let's say person A to be elected as a chair, and the delegates who are elected want person B. So even if the whole other 3,000 members want this person A, it does not matter, because in the end what matters is whom the delegates will vote for. Now, you will tell me that many other NGOs have this structure, and yes, I understand this and I accept this. However, unlike many other NGO where we have non-disabled people, people with disabilities, blind people, are having much less opportunities outside of the union. So I have seen a lot of non-disabled organizations where, for example, young people had different opinions about how things should go, and they would leave the organization and establish their own, and they would compete for the grants because they have all the skills, they have social capital, they have possibilities, know languages, have computer skills, have visual skills to do campaigns, to do all this media, video editing, all that is necessary to persuade the donors, which in our community, unfortunately, we don't have this kind of qualified people. I mean, maybe we have a couple, but it's impossible for a couple of people to establish alternative to the blind union and, let's say, compete with it in a good way, because again, the union has a lot of resources, has buildings, has offices, has staff that can sit and call 3,000 people and, I don't know, ask them something and conduct research or survey or whatever is necessary. They have contact information of 3,000 people, which we will not have, and nobody will give us due to the data protection regulations. I'm a board member of a network of women with disabilities, and we have been asking for a space, for an office for years, because without office it's impossible to widen, it's impossible to communicate with your potential members and beneficiaries, it's impossible to hold press conferences with journalists. It's not so easy to also meet from homes. Anyways, this is why we really are in an unequal situation. Also, individual circumstances of the organization have to be taken into account. In the blind union, we had one person in power for over 20 years by now. First, he was a chairman, Revaz Maisuradze. He was a chairperson for 2 consecutive terms. According to the statute, then, he was not allowed to run for the 3rd term right away. So he proposed somebody else, his deputy, he proposed somebody else to become a chairman, and he appointed him as a deputy chair. It's kind of like Putin-Medvedev scheme, situation. Then in 2016, he got re-elected again for 5 more years. And then in 2021, he decided to step down, but again, very formally, and I will explain why. Today we have a young chairwoman, which is in itself is not a bad idea and bad thing, of course. However, he still stays in power. He's still in the board, and he's a financial advisor there. So he even has paid jobs still. Oh, and by the way, I also forgot to mention that almost all 48 delegates are also the union employees. So they are employed in different like businesses and different district representations of the union. So again, because we don't have so many employment alternatives for people with disabilities in the country, losing the job for a person with disabilities is terrible. It's a tragedy, personal tragedy. Therefore, these people are very afraid of losing their jobs. And they have serious conflict of interest, therefore, because if they express dissenting opinion on, I don't know, for example, on the financial account, on the activity report, or anything, on if they criticize the chairman's performance, they will be fired. And we see now we have 13 people now fired, and I will explain how they are fired a bit later. However, so anyways, this again shows and provides the incentive that excuse me, that it's impossible to dissent. So talking about our former chairman already, Revaz Maisuradze, who is still again in the leadership of the union. How do we know this? Well, he still attends most of the different meetings with the government, with government officials. For example, when these people who were fired wanted to meet and ask the Prime Minister's advisor on human rights to talk to the blind union, he went to talk to the Prime Minister's advisor, not the chairwoman. He did not even take her with him together. When we were discussing the signature issues in the parliament, it was her, the chairperson, and Revaz Maisuradze, again from the board, who went together with her in the parliament. She did not decide to take any other board member with her but him. In one of our district's assemblies, where he is a member, when we had a district assembly, the chairwoman of our district directly told and proposed him as a chairman of that session, of the assembly. So she refused, let's say, to lead the session. Of course, all people voted for him. I would say most of people did vote for him, because this is whom they are used to, and because, again, she never even expressed the will to lead the session of the district representation, division, yeah? A chairwoman of which she is. And there are many more instances and examples. And for example, when I was introducing our new proposal of direct elections of the chairman at that session, he was interrupting me all the time. So he made it very, very apparent that it's him that is opposing this new idea, and that it's him that runs the show, let's say. And what happens, the reason why I even decided to propose and put the proposal forward is because I was a member of the Statute Amendment Committee. So they decided to amend the statute. It usually happens after the new chairperson is elected, or generally after each elections almost. And they did appoint me because they knew that I would be in the minority there, and it's good for, it's a tokenistic approach, kind of, that, we had her there, and she agreed with what we have talked about, which may not be true, but yes, they do prepare the session meeting minutes, but these minutes are very formal. They just list, there were 3 proposals that were made, 2 were rejected, 1 was, let's say, approved. They usually don't the minutes that they prepare, the official documents, usually don't reflect all the discussion. You know, who proposed what, who refused what, due to what arguments. So it's very hard to prove what I have, let's say, put forward there and what did I agree to and what I did not agree to. Last year, when I was a member of this elections committee, where we were establishing the quotas for the delegates, deciding so which division should have how many delegates and so on, I would receive these formal minutes, and then I would really add the substance. You know, who said what, who opposed what, and why. Just to document, for the history to be there. And this year happened the same, essentially. And on the one hand, he was heavily opposing this idea. And he gave a few reasons. He said, it won't make any difference. But then, in a private talk, when the session was adjourned, he told me, but what if someone from outside of Tbilisi wants to run for the chairmanship? We do not have money, we cannot afford to rent that person an apartment if he or she gets elected. And I said, well, we shouldn't have to really be renting this apartment. I mean, this kind of person will decide on one's own. Maybe he or she will have some property, or maybe will live with relatives or whatever. It's their own choice. It's, you know, we choose where to work, and if it's necessary, we may rent also to stay and work where we work. Right now, they did decide to still send this proposal to other delegates as, let's say, a minority proposal. However, I really doubted back then that they would frame it correctly. You know, it depends a lot on how you frame a proposal. If you say, there was some other proposal, I don't know, you can read it if you want. You know, if you're not enthusiastically promoting, then people won't read it. Or if you will talk about it in a sarcastic way, also the people will not read it. And this is what happens now. I am receiving messages from the regions that really they're gathering signatures not for this proposal, but against this proposal. So who is against the direct elections? And the reason why it's so important is because when we as individual activists try to advocate for certain things with the government, for example, when we try to talk about the signature legislation that should be perfected and that has a lot of gaps, and we point out these gaps and we propose solutions, you know, constructively how these should be addressed, the Blind Union comes out and says, we applaud this proposal, we applaud this bill, it's perfect. Let's pass it as soon as possible. They do not advocate for tactile tracks to be to be introduced in the city. They do not advocate for audible street lights, accessible street lights. When one of our activists wrote a letter, an official letter to the Prime Minister's office and the Mayor's office in Braille, it was kind of his attempt, you know, individual attempt, to promote Braille and promote blind issues and raise public awareness through this. The Blind Union's board issued an official statement that was criticizing him, that said that he's pursuing wrong priorities, and so on. Well, he was not harming anyone. But the Blind Union considers it normal to be getting into the way of other activists who are trying to advocate for other things. The problem is that the government then tells us that you are a minority and the Blind Union represents the majority. However, again, the reason why I try to explain what was going on with the statute is to show that the Blind Union governing elite really does not represent those 3,000 people. These 3,000 people really do not have a say. They do, and even according to our statute, this opposition to this reform is not normal, because in the end, if this reform happens, nobody will suffer. Those who want to vote, they will be allowed to vote, and it will be few hundred people who usually show up to our division assemblies to vote for the division chair people, right? And who vote for the delegates. They will vote for the chairman as well, or chairwoman. Last year, in my division, we had our quota was only 6 delegates, but 15 people ran. So 9 more people were denied the right to elect their chairperson, which they wanted to do, at least, you know. And again, the government has a kind of double standard. On the one hand, they say that it's an NGO and like we cannot interfere, even though right now it's been 2 weeks that people are on hunger strike and their health is deteriorating and all of that. Still, but on the other hand, they see this NGO, the Blind Union, as a monopolist on an expertise in the blind issues, in the blind affairs, and they use them as an intermediary between the blind community and the government. But again, if they use them as an intermediary, they have to ensure the mechanisms that protect and that provide democracy, internal democracy in the union. And this is what really happened. I will also now talk a bit more about their policies. So the union has, again, a lot of properties that they rent, and this is basically the source of their income. They also have a hotel in one of our sea resorts in Tsikhis Dziri, which is not cheap for the blind. I mean, for everyone, like one person, one night costs 75 lari, which is about $25. But for the blind and his or her accompanying person, it costs 45 lari, which yes is cheaper, but on the market you can find much cheaper options concerning the same conditions. You know, when you have warm water in the room, you have internet access, proximity to the sea and to the beach, and all of that. For example, me and my family, we last year we went to a family hotel and we paid 35 lari for night for 3 people. So what I'm saying is that commercially it's more expensive. And but many blind people do prefer going still there because it's the place that they're used to, where their friends go. But again, so they're kind of speculating on blind people's emotions, even though, again, most, like 90%, it's their own statistics, 90% of our members are socially unprotected and receive targeted social assistance, or maybe even 95, I'm not sure. So these people cannot afford to go there. And the government funds this organization still. It gave them property, but it still funds them with hundreds of thousands of lari through different projects, including, for example, they provide in certain regions, in certain municipalities, they pay for few blind people to go and actually rest there in the blind union's hotel, which again commercially is not so feasible, even for this, you know, from the perspective of the state. And when the state pays this money to support also the organization, it really should be more interested in its internal democracy, and when they violate the rights of their employees or of other people with disabilities, of other members. For example, in my case, the former chairman always tried to undermine what I had said publicly with government officials, with parliament. He always tried to portray me as incompetent, as unprepared. Not only me, but other younger activists as well. For example, this guy, Dato Wiriliani, who wrote this official letter to the government in Braille, he told about him that he does not read and write Braille. He always tried to discredit all the activists. And indeed, when I tried to push, and I still am trying to push for this statute change, for the direct elections, he told me that the registry, the national registry of the organizations, will not receive my proposals because I proposed, these elections happen simultaneously in all divisions. Of course, in our situation, it will be impossible for blind people to travel to Tbilisi for elections. And this is actually another misinformation or disinformation that is being spread now, is that they really scare people, say, you will have to travel to Tbilisi at your own expense to the capital, at your own expense if you will want to vote, which is not true, because according to my proposal, the elections would to happen, again, locally in their divisions, and it will not require any additional resources. They keep asking also this, so he tried to discredit me, and I wrote to the registry and I sent them this proposal, and I asked if they would register it, and they said, we will register anything that organization decided, formally and legally according to their procedure. He wanted me to also register and then try to register an NGO with similar statute and see if it will get registered. I mean, I tried, I was late to go to that office, and it was good that I didn't do it, because at the division session, when I brought this paper from the National Registry, the official response to my letter, and I offered to read it, he said, oh, come on, okay, no, you don't have to, we don't need this to be read. I mentioned, I thought you used other word, and I said, please, let's read the text. I did not use the word that you thought I used there that would create these issues. And he didn't let us read the text either. Unfortunately, last year I was also running for the chairmanship of the union, and I was calling the delegates and talking to them, and many of them told me, like when I was asking, based on what will you make your decision, whom to vote for, and how will you vote, and all of that, they say, I don't know. And some said, as people from above will say, I have heard this with my own ears. And after this, of course, it's very little hope and that these delegates really can make independent decisions. I also have to say that at the delegate assemblies, where they are supposed to evaluate the financial reports, they don't receive these reports in advance. So imagine people travel from 6-hour distance, for example, hundreds of kilometers away. They are tired. They have to sit in this room together, like 48, 50 people for hours. And they have not read previously, pre-read the documents. So they don't know what questions to ask. Of course, the documents are being read there at place, but it's not so easy to concentrate in that setting. It's also not so easy to prepare questions right away, because then also, I have attended few of these assemblies, when you try to start discussion, which takes time, deliberation always takes time, especially if people have not previously seen the documents that they have to deliberate on, right? Then I say, oh, please, let's get over it as quickly as possible. Let's hurry up. We have to go, and so on. So they really are supposed to be representing the interests of other blind people, but they're not, because they raise their hands and they clap to things that they have not fully maybe read and fully understand. And few of the people who were delegates there, who were board members there, insisted and said, I don't know anything about law, I don't know anything about economics. And they still were there. All of this is very, very hard. And now I will elaborate a bit on what goes on with these 13 people, 3 out of whom are on hunger strike. One of them, Georgi Yanukidze, is a former deputy chair. He was elected together with a new chairwoman in September 2021. And then he was fired. He was first fired by her, by the chairwoman. According to statute, she didn't have the right to do it. She said, I suspend him. And it meant that for a month or so he did not receive his salary. And then they held extraordinary session of the delegates and they expelled him. Another case is Tsira Vepkhwadze. Tsira Vepkhwadze is the head of another non-profit that the Blind Union has established in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. That non-profit is the Culture, Sports and Arts Center. This is its name. They issue a magazine in Braille. They have theater. They have a very good choir and ensemble of national folk songs. They have also an audiobook recording studio there, which is called Knowledge or Tsodna in Georgian. Supposedly this organization was supposed to be an independent entity. When in 2017 or 2018, I told our then chairman, Revaz Maisuradze, that the Blind Union is service provider because it receives state funding. He said, no, what are you talking about? If you mean the culture center that receives the state funding, they're independent NGO. We just established them. But it turned out, so I will talk about it a bit more. So the chairwoman, Tsira Vepkhwadze, kept on demanding to increase the funding for the center. Well, because there was pandemic and people need salaries and utilities prices go up and so on. And then last year, she supported another candidate, not the one that the former chairman wanted to be elected, Nana Bregwadze. And then she was dismissed in winter of this year. So she was dismissed after elections. They say that she was a bad manager, that she had some issues with some people, but why did they not fire her right away when these issues arose? Why did they not give her warning? So it really seems, and it's very reasonable to say, that she was dismissed due to her political views, due to the fact that probably she was seen as a competitor, potentially. Because the culture center is located in this settlement where many blind people live together. And that settlement historically had a lot of influence of how things were being decided in the Blind Union, because it's, it's a compact settlement, so the concentration of the blind people is high there, and they get organized easier. Once Tsira was fired, again by the board, so it turned out that, even though it's a quote-unquote independent NGO, the director of this independent NGO can be fired by the board of the Blind Union, which they did. They fired her. And then 12 other employees, in a solidarity with her, went on a strike, essentially. They did not show up at work. They received a warning that if you don't show up at work, you will be fired. We will not renew your contracts. They showed up, but they already, when they showed up, they saw that there is already an ordinance to dismiss them. So on they went with the protest. Now there is another dimension, and now we have a hunger strike because, again, these people tried to address the government, the parliament, the embassies, but again, people are very cautious because they say this is an NGO, even though, again, the government has a huge stake at that NGO. And another dimension of this all is the prosecutions. So there are few complaints against Blind Union in the prosecutor's office. Some of them, as I have heard, date back to 1997, but I don't know. This is not kind of confirmed. There is another one from 2006 and 7. All of them are really getting dusted in the prosecutor's office. This year, the prosecutor's office has received a bunch of more. First was the complaint filed by Georgi Yanukidze, the former deputy chairman of the Blind Union, because he said that throughout this month, that when he was the deputy chair, he had collected certain materials which show some corruption schemes. For instance, what he appeals to is that some properties are being sold at a very cheap price, at a much lower price than commercially, and as well as rented at a very cheap price. So there is a reasonable doubt of kickbacks. Again, this is something I do not have a proof of, but this is his words. And meanwhile, I have to say that throughout the years, I have been hearing these talks about corruption in the union and mismanagement of its properties. I also attended few times the board meetings, and every time I would attend, they would speak about selling some new properties, about how some tenants don't pay the rent. So it was always talking about the losses, essentially, not the gains. Another complaint to the prosecutor's office was also submitted by Tzira Vebkhwadze, and it had few dozens of signatures as well. And finally, actually I think there are two, I'm not quite sure, honestly. I think there are two complaints by Tzira Vebkhwadze to the prosecutor's office. And finally, there is a complaint by the Blind Union against Tzira Vebkhwadze that she has committed, so against this former chairwoman of the Culture Center, that she was involved in some kind of corruption. Now, with this, I want to begin with the last complaint. Everybody is demanding for a rapid investigation, including Tzira. She was once summoned to prosecutor's office to ask to be questioned. So she was just questioned. She does not have a status of prosecuted person, let's say. She was, called upon there as a witness. In the same way, I mean, in theory, they can call me tomorrow as well and ask some questions, for example. In the same way. There was no allegations against her. And this is why they cannot really close up the investigation, because there's nothing against her. With three other complaints, the prosecutor's office does not hurry to investigate. Why? Because there is this kind of unwritten rule or stereotype or whatever, where they say, we don't want disabled people being prosecuted. And this is very damaging stereotype, because it really feeds into this stigma that we are angels and that, people with disabilities cannot be. They're like infantile and they cannot be criminals and so on and so forth. So what happens is that all these prosecutions are hanging in the air. But recently, the Blind Union chairwoman said that because because Tzira is questioned, we cannot restore her at work until you bring a document that says that there are no allegations against her, that there is no investigation against her. Again, there is a presumption of innocence that, of course, until somebody is convicted by the court, that person is innocent. However, it's a conservative community, it's a closed-up community, the Blind Union membership community. So for them, only the rumor that, there are some allegations against somebody, especially who already is fired and not in power, is enough for that person to be defamed. So there is mass defamation of her. They also published, the reasons why she was dismissed, and she complained to the personal data protection inspector, and the Blind Union was fined for this. However, when they did bring from prosecutor's office the document that said that there is an official document that said that there are no allegations against her. But now the chairwoman says that this is not enough. Let's say I need a document that says that there is no investigation. But the problem is that she said this personally on Friday. We had a small meeting, let's say, kind of negotiations attempt, and she said that all these complaints are united in one file, let's say, and all of these complaints, both against the blind union and also her issue, was included. So even though if all her questioning is over, they cannot say that investigation is over, because investigation is not over regarding the other complaints. Then the question arises, if they don't want to restore her, if they fired her because there were allegations against her, against Tzira Vebkhwadze, I mean the director of the culture center, why there are so many also complaints against the blind union? Why doesn't its former chairman, Revaz Maisuradze, and its current chairman, Sopo Khutsishvili, why don't they step down also? Because there may be allegations against them too. Of course, they don't step down. They say we don't know specifically against whom are those complaints filed, and so on. So we again see double standards. On June the 29th, when they started the hunger strike, they had written 3 demands, these 3 people. First was for all 13 people to be restored at their workplace and compensated for the months that they have skipped, the months of work that they had skipped. On July the 1st, they received a written document which was addressed to all 3 of them by names, to Mr. Georgi Enukidze, Ms. Tzira Vebkhwadze, and Ms. Lela Vebkhwadze. Lela Vebkhwadze is one of the 12 people who left their jobs in solidarity with Tzira. It was addressed namely to 3 of these people, and it said, concerning your demands, number 1, all of you can return unconditionally and resume your jobs. These people dropped their jaw when they read it. And they asked her, hey, is this real? I mean, so are we all restored in our rights? And she said, wait, it's technical mistake. And she never provided an alternative written document ever since. It speaks a lot about, competence, generally speaking, in the union. On July the 4th, there was a court hearing. And she did not bring, the blind union representative, the chairwoman, did not bring the corrected version of, their official response to the demands of those on the hunger strike. She didn't say to the judge, hey, Your Honor, this is wrong document, we issued new one, and because it's new, it has a priority. No. So this document is actually considered by the judge and was allowed as a piece of evidence. Yeah, so this is something else that I want to talk about, is that there are also court complaints. So there are prosecutor's office complaints, but there are also court complaints. All 3 of them complained to the court because, 13 of them complained to the court because of their unlawful dismissals. Georgi Enukidze's case has gone through 2 instances, including the appellate court, and Tzira's case, and also Lela Vebkhwadze's case, so there are 2 more complaints to the court. One will be considered on August the 23rd, and another one nobody knows. So that's another thing, that the justice really is slowing down. It's not fast, it's not rapid. People are on hunger strike and things are not being resolved. Actually, about non-formal governance again. On Friday, when I tried to speak with the chairwoman. She started talking to us, but then, for whatever reason, she decided to call 3 more board members and involve them in this discussion. And really, what happened was then, in the end, it was another board member who was giving answers instead of the chairwoman, even though we were expecting the answers from her. I think I should stop here because there is, I guess, a lot more to say. I really would like to draw the attention of your UNCRPD committee to this situation. It's very drastic. The organization that has a lot of power and even almost a monopoly on advocating for the rights of the blind and visually impaired does not do it. Instead, they actually violate our rights. I will stop here. Thank you for listening, and I'm really looking forward. Please share. Also, if you are in Tbilisi, please come to the Blind Union building. We really would appreciate anybody's visit, anybody's expression of solidarity. And something else, if there are members of the union who are listening to me now, I would really urge you all to sign to this demand of direct elections, because even if you maybe yourself don't want to elect and vote for the chairperson, at least give us, those who do want to vote, the right to do so, which now is really dependent on somebody else's will, and it's very unfair. Again, many more people would be involved than 48 delegates, and more people participate, there is more democracy, of course. Please share this as much as you can. Thank you very much.